The morning William's world shattered began like any other Tuesday. Coffee brewing in the kitchen, newspapers scattered across the marble counter, and the familiar sound of his wife humming while preparing breakfast. But hidden beneath this picture of domestic tranquility was a secret so devastating, so carefully buried for decades, that when it finally surfaced, it would transform a respected father into a man consumed by an uncontrollable fury. What happens when a loyal palace guard, bound by years of silence, can no longer carry the weight of what he witnessed? What happens when a single confession unravels not just a marriage but an entire family's understanding of their own history? This is the story of William, a man who thought he knew everything about his life, his wife Camilla, and the son who called him father. But some truths are so explosive, so life-altering, that they don't just change relationships, they destroy them completely. The guard's trembling voice would echo in William's mind for months. "Sir, there's something about your son.
Something you need to know about what really happened all those years ago. Sometimes the most devastating battles aren't fought on distant fields. They're fought in the privacy of family homes, where love and betrayal dance together in the shadows of what William Henderson had always prided himself on: living an orderly life."
At 52, he maintained the same morning routine he had followed for the past 15 years. Wake at 6, shower, dress in one of his perfectly pressed suits, and join his wife Camilla and their son Marcus for breakfast in the sunlit dining room of their estate home.
The house itself spoke of success and stability. Situated on 12 acres of manicured grounds in the countryside outside London, the Georgian mansion had been in William's family for 3 generations. Oil paintings of his ancestors lined the hallways, and every room reflected the careful attention of someone who valued tradition and propriety above all else. William had built his reputation as one of the country's most respected corporate lawyers, handling high-profile mergers and acquisitions for multinational corporations. His colleagues knew him as methodical, fair, and utterly reliable. His clients trusted him with their most sensitive business matters because William Henderson's word was his bond. But that Tuesday morning in October, as autumn leaves danced outside the tall windows, William had no idea that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. Camilla, elegant and poised at 48, moved through their morning routine with the grace that had first captivated William 23 years ago. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a soft chignon, and she wore the pearl necklace he had given her for their 20th anniversary. She poured his coffee just the way he liked it, black, no sugar, and arranged the morning newspapers beside his plate. "Marcus has that university interview today," she reminded him, her voice carrying the slight accent that hinted at her European upbringing. "He's quite nervous about it." William looked across the table at the young man who had been the center of his world for the past 22 years. Marcus was tall and lean, with dark hair and intelligent green eyes. He carried himself with quiet confidence, the kind that came from being raised in a home where he was genuinely loved and supported. "You'll do brilliantly," William assured his son. "Oxford would be lucky to have you." Marcus smiled, but William could see the anxiety beneath his composed exterior. The boy had always been a perfectionist, perhaps too much so. William sometimes worried that Marcus put too much pressure on himself, always striving to live up to expectations that might have been too high. After breakfast, William kissed Camilla goodbye and headed to his office in the city. The drive gave him time to think about the day ahead. He had 3 important client meetings scheduled, and he needed to review the final details of a complex international acquisition. Work had always been William's refuge, the place where problems could be solved with logic and careful analysis. His law firm occupied 2 floors of a historic building near the Thames. William's corner office overlooked the river, and on clear days he could see all the way to Westminster Bridge. His secretary, Mrs. Patterson, had been with him for 12 years. She greeted him with his usual stack of messages and reminded him about his lunch appointment with a potential client from Germany. The morning proceeded exactly as planned. William reviewed contracts, made phone calls, and prepared for his meetings. Everything was normal, predictable, under control. He had no reason to suspect that miles away, in a small flat across town, a conversation was taking place that would shatter everything he believed about his life. James Morrison had served as a security guard at various locations throughout London for over 30 years. He was a quiet man in his 60s, the kind of person who noticed everything but rarely spoke unless spoken to. For most of his career, discretion had been his most valuable asset. He had seen and heard things that could have ruined careers and destroyed families, but he had always kept his mouth shut. But lately, James had been having trouble sleeping. The weight of what he knew, what he had witnessed over 2 decades ago, had become unbearable. His wife had died the previous spring, and without her steady presence, the secrets he carried felt heavier than ever. That morning, James called in sick to his current job at a downtown office building.
Instead of reporting for work, he sat in his small kitchen staring at a business card he had kept hidden in his wallet for 20 minutes. William Henderson, attorney at law. The elegant script and expensive paper stock seemed to mock him. James remembered the night everything changed. It was November 1998, and he had been working security at an upscale hotel in Mayfair. The job was usually boring, checking credentials, monitoring the lobby, making sure the wealthy guests felt safe and undisturbed. But that night he had seen something that had haunted him ever since. He had been making his rounds when he noticed a woman hurrying through the lobby. Even in the dim lighting, he recognized her immediately. Camilla Henderson was the kind of woman people noticed. Beautiful, sophisticated, the wife of one of London's most prominent lawyers. But she wasn't supposed to be at that hotel. She was supposed to be at home with her husband and their newborn son. James had watched from the shadows as Camilla met a man at the elevator. They had embraced with the familiarity of lovers, not strangers. The man was tall, dark-haired, and carried himself with an arrogance that James found immediately distasteful. They had gone upstairs together, and James had spent the rest of his shift wondering what he should do with what he had witnessed. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part had come 3 hours later, when Camilla had returned to the lobby alone, crying. In her arms was a baby. A tiny infant who couldn't have been more than a few days old. James had hidden behind a pillar, watching as she met yet another man. This one older, distinguished, wearing an expensive coat despite the mild weather. The conversation had been brief but intense. James couldn't hear the words, but he could see the desperation in Camilla's face, the way she clutched the baby protectively. Money had changed hands. A thick envelope that the older man had reluctantly accepted. Then he had taken the baby and disappeared into the night. Camilla had stood alone in that hotel lobby for nearly 10 minutes, sobbing quietly. When she finally composed herself and left, James had known with absolute certainty that he had just witnessed something that would destroy lives if it ever came to light. The next day, the newspapers had carried a small announcement. Mr. and Mrs. Helping William Henderson were pleased to announce the birth of their son, Marcus. James had stared at that announcement for a long time, understanding exactly what it meant. For over 20 years, he had kept that secret. He had watched from afar as the Henderson family appeared in society columns, at charity events, at all the places where London's elite gathered. He had seen Marcus grow from a child into a young man, had read about his academic achievements and his acceptance to university. But the weight of the truth had become unbearable. James knew he was getting older, that his health wasn't what it used to be. If something happened to him, the secret would die with him. And somehow that felt wrong. He deserved to know. William Henderson, the man who had raised Marcus as his own son, who had loved him and provided for him and shaped him into the fine young man he had become, he deserved to know the truth about what his wife had done all those years ago. James picked up the phone with trembling fingers. Mrs. Patterson answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional. Henderson and Associates, how may I help you? I need to speak with Mr. Henderson, James said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's about his family. It's urgent. There was a pause. May I ask who's calling? My name is James Morrison. I was a security guard at the Claridge Hotel in 1998. Tell him it's about something that happened the night his son was born. Another pause, longer this time. Please hold. James waited, his heart pounding. In the background, he could hear the normal sounds of a busy law office, phones ringing, voices murmuring, the click of keyboards. Normal life continuing as if the world hadn't just shifted on its axis. When William's voice came on the line, it was cautious but polite. This is William Henderson. I understand you have something to discuss regarding my family. Mr. Henderson, James began, then stopped. How did you tell a man that his entire life was built on a lie? How did you explain that the son he adored, the boy he had raised and loved and been so proud of, might not be his biological child at all? Mr. Henderson, he tried again. I think we need to meet in person. What I have to tell you, it's not something that should be discussed over the phone. William was quiet for a long moment. What exactly is this about, Mr. Pennance? Morrison? It's about your wife, sir, and your son, Marcus. It's about what really happened the night he was born. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. When William finally spoke, his voice was different, harder, more controlled. Where would you like to meet? They arranged to meet at a small cafe near the Thames, away from both of their usual haunts. James spent the rest of the morning rehearsing what he would say. But no amount of preparation could make this conversation easy. William arrived first, choosing a corner table where they could speak privately. He had spent the drive trying to convince himself that this was all a mistake, that some disturbed individual was trying to cause trouble for his family. But something in Morrison's voice had made it impossible to dismiss. When James walked in, William recognized him immediately as a man carrying a heavy burden. He was thin, gray-haired, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of a life spent working with his hands. His eyes were kind but tired, and when he sat down across from William, his hands shook slightly. "Thank you for coming," James said quietly. "I know this is strange, and I know you probably think I'm some sort of lunatic, but I promise you, everything I'm about to tell you is the truth." William studied the older man's face. "Go on." James took a deep breath and began to speak. He told William about that night at the hotel, about seeing Camilla with a man who was clearly not her husband. He described the baby, the money, the older man who had taken the child away. He spoke slowly, carefully, making sure every detail was clear. As James talked, William felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. The story was too specific, too detailed to be a fabrication, and there were things, little things about that time in their lives that suddenly made terrible sense. Camilla's unusual behavior during her pregnancy, the way she had insisted on handling all the arrangements for the birth herself, her reluctance to let anyone visit them in the hospital, the way she had seemed almost surprised when people commented on how much Marcus resembled William. "Are you telling me," William said slowly, "that my son is not my biological child?"
James looked down at his hands. "I'm telling you what I saw, mister."
"Henderson, I can't tell you what it means. But I think your wife may have had another child that night. And I think something happened to that baby." The words hung in the air between them like a physical weight. William stared out the window at the Thames, watching the water flow past, carrying debris and secrets alike toward the sea. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked finally. "After all these years, why now?" "Because I can't carry it anymore," James said simply. "And because you have a right to know. Whatever happened that night, whatever your wife did or didn't do, you deserve to know the truth about your own life." William stood up slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I appreciate your honesty." "What will you do?" James asked. William looked at him with eyes that had grown hard and cold. "I'm going to find out exactly what my wife has been hiding from me for the past 22 years. As William walked back to his car, his mind was already working, processing the information with the same methodical approach he used for his most complex legal cases. But this wasn't about contracts or acquisitions. This was about his family, his marriage, his son. And if what Morrison had told him was true, then everything he thought he knew about his life was a lie. Thought we knew. William drove back to his office in a fog of disbelief and growing anger. The familiar streets of London seemed foreign to him now, as if he was seeing them through the eyes of a stranger. Every assumption he had made about his life, every moment of happiness with his family, was now tainted by the possibility that it had all been built on deception. When he arrived at his office, Mrs. Addison took one look at his face and immediately cleared his afternoon schedule. She had worked for him long enough to recognize when something serious had happened, though she couldn't have imagined the magnitude of what was troubling him. William closed his office door and sat behind his desk, staring at the family photograph that had occupied the same spot for 15 years. Camilla, Marcus, and himself at Marcus's graduation from secondary school. They all looked so happy, so perfectly normal. The loving wife, the proud father, the accomplished son. But was any of it real? William had built his career on facts, on evidence, on the careful examination of documents and testimony. He would approach this situation the same way. If Morrison's story was true, there would be evidence. Hospital records, birth certificates, perhaps even photographs or witnesses. People didn't simply steal babies and create false identities without leaving some kind of trail. He picked up the phone and called David Chen, a private investigator who had worked on several cases for the firm over the years. David was discreet, thorough, and completely trustworthy, exactly what William needed right now. "David, it's William Henderson. I need to meet with you today. It's personal and it's urgent." David agreed to meet him at his office within the hour. While he waited, William tried to focus on work, but his mind kept returning to Morrison's story. The security guard had no reason to lie, no obvious motivation for causing trouble. If anything, coming forward after all these years put him at risk of legal complications. When David arrived, William found himself struggling with how to begin. How do you ask someone to investigate your own family? How do you admit that you might not know the most basic facts about your wife and son?
David, I need you to look into something for me, he began carefully. It involves my family, and it needs to stay completely confidential. David Chen was a small, intense man in his 40s who had left the police force to start his own investigation agency. He had built his reputation on handling sensitive cases for wealthy clients who needed problems solved quietly. Of course, David said. What can I do for you? William told him about Morrison's claims, watching David's expression carefully for any sign of skepticism or disbelief. But David simply listened, taking notes, asking the occasional clarifying question. When William finished, David was quiet for a long moment. These are serious allegations, David said finally. If they're true, we're talking about identity fraud at a minimum, possibly kidnapping or child trafficking. Are you prepared for what we might find? William nodded grimly. I need to know the truth, whatever it is. All right, I'll need some information from you. Your son's birth certificate, any hospital records you might have, details about your wife's pregnancy. I'll also need to track down this James Morrison and verify his story. How long will this take? A few days for the preliminary investigation. If we find something significant, it could take weeks to get the full picture. William provided David with all the documentation he could find: Marcus's birth certificate, insurance records, even some photographs from that period. Looking at them now, he noticed things that hadn't seemed important before. Camilla's strange reluctance to let anyone visit them in the hospital. The way she had handled all the paperwork herself. Her insistence that they use a private doctor rather than their usual family physician. After David left, William tried to return to his normal routine, but concentration was impossible. Every phone call seemed meaningless, every legal document irrelevant compared to the questions tearing at his mind. Finally, he gave up and decided to go home early. The drive through the countryside usually relaxed him, but today the familiar scenery only made him think about all the family drives they had taken over the years. Marcus's excitement about various school trips, Camilla's gentle commentary about the changing seasons, their discussions about his son's future plans. Had any of those moments been genuine? Had Camilla been thinking about her secret every time she looked at Marcus? Had she ever felt guilty about the deception she was perpetrating? When he arrived home, Camilla was in the garden, tending to her roses. She looked up and smiled when she saw his car, the same warm, welcoming smile she had given him thousands of times before. But now William found himself studying that smile, looking for signs of deception or guilt. You're home early, she said, pulling off her gardening gloves. How did your meetings go? Fine, he said, trying to keep his voice neutral. Where's Marcus? Still at his interview. He should be home soon. She paused, studying his face. Is everything all right? You look tired. William felt a surge of anger at her apparent concern. If Morrison's story was true, then Camilla was the most accomplished actress he had ever encountered. Every expression of love, every gesture of affection, every moment of intimacy they had shared, all of it could have been performance. Just a long day, he said. I think I'll have a drink before dinner. He poured himself a scotch and sat in his study, surrounded by law books and family photographs. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was one of London's most respected lawyers, a man who specialized in uncovering the truth in complex corporate disputes. Marcus arrived home just as they were sitting down to dinner. He was animated, excited about how the interview had gone, full of stories about the professors he had met and the other candidates he had encountered. William watched his son talk, noting every gesture, every expression, every physical characteristic. Marcus was tall, like William, but his coloring was different. Darker hair, green eyes instead of William's blue ones. William had always assumed he had inherited those features from Camilla's side of the family. But now he found himself wondering if they came from someone else entirely. Dad, are you listening? Marcus asked, and William realized he had been staring. Sorry, son, just thinking about work. Tell me about the professors. As Marcus continued his story, William felt a sharp pain in his chest. This young man, regardless of his biological origins, was the person William loved most in the world. He had taught Marcus to ride a bicycle, had coached his football team, had stayed up late helping him with mathematics homework. He had been there for every important moment of Marcus's life. If Morrison's story was true, it would destroy not just William's relationship with Camilla, but potentially his relationship with his son as well. Could a 22-year-old understand the complexities of what had happened? Would Marcus blame William for the revelation?
Would he hate Camilla for the deception? After dinner, William excused himself and went to his study. He called David Chen's mobile phone. "Any progress?" he asked. "Some interesting developments," David said. "I found Morrison's employment records from 1998.
He did work security at the Claridge Hotel during the time period he mentioned. I also found some preliminary information about the hotel's guest records from that night."
"And?" "There was indeed a reservation under your wife's maiden name. Single occupancy, but the room service records show meals for 2 people ordered to the room."
William closed his eyes. "What else?" "I'm still working on the hospital records. That's going to take more time. Medical records are heavily protected, even from 22 years ago. But I have a contact who might be able to help."
"Keep digging," William said. "I need to know everything." The next morning, William woke before dawn, unable to sleep.
He stood at the bedroom window, watching the sun rise over their beautiful grounds, and tried to imagine what his life would look like if Morrison's allegations proved true. Divorce seemed inevitable.
Even if Camilla had some explanation, even if there were circumstances he didn't understand, William couldn't see how their marriage could survive this level of deception. The thought of dividing their assets, of selling the house that had been in his family for generations, made him feel sick.
But what about Marcus? How do you tell a young man that his entire identity might be false? How do you explain that the mother he loves and respects might have committed crimes to bring him into their family? William showered and dressed mechanically, going through the motions of his morning routine, while his mind churned with possibilities.
When he came down to breakfast, Camilla was already there, looking fresh and beautiful as always. "Good morning, darling," she said, rising to kiss his cheek. "You were restless last night. Bad dreams?" William studied her face carefully. Was there something different in her expression? Some hint of nervousness or guilt?
"Just thinking about a complex case," he said. Marcus joined them a few minutes later, still excited about his interview results.
He had received an email from Oxford expressing strong interest in his application. Any other time, William would have been thrilled. Now, he found himself wondering if the boy's academic achievements were partly due to genes inherited from a father he had never known. After breakfast, William drove to his office and immediately called David Chen. "I've found something significant," David said without preamble. "Can you meet me at my office this morning?" William canceled his first 2 appointments and drove across town to David's modest office in a converted warehouse. The investigator was waiting with a thick folder and a grim expression. "Sit down, William," David said. "This is going to be difficult." David opened the folder and spread several documents across his desk. Birth certificates, hospital records, employment files, and what appeared to be surveillance photographs. "Let's start with what I know for certain," David said. "James Morrison was telling the truth about working at the Claridge Hotel. He was on duty the night of November 15th, 1998, the same night your son's birth certificate says he was born." William nodded, bracing himself for what was coming. "I was able to obtain copies of the hotel's security logs from that period. Your wife did sign in to the hotel that night, using her maiden name. She was there from approximately 9 p.m. until 1 a.m., and Marcus was born at 11:47 p.m., according to his birth certificate," William said quietly.
"Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting."
David pulled out another document. "I managed to get a look at the hospital records, very quietly through a contact who owed me a favor. According to the official records, your wife was admitted to St. Mary's Hospital at 10 p.m. that night and gave birth at 11:47 p.m. William stared at the documents. "That's impossible. If she was at the hotel from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m., she couldn't have been giving birth at the hospital." "That's correct. Which means either the hotel records are wrong, the hospital records are wrong, or someone falsified medical documents." David pulled out a photograph, a grainy black and white image that appeared to be from a security camera. "This is from the hotel's security system. The date stamp shows November 15th, 1998 at 11:30 p.m.
He pointed to 2 figures in the lobby. "That's your wife, and that's a man I haven't been able to identify yet." William studied the photograph.
Even in the poor quality image, there was no mistaking Camilla. She was holding what appeared to be a bundle in her arms, a bundle roughly the size of an infant. "There's more," David said, his voice gentle. "I found records of a cash payment made to a private medical service that same night. The payment was made by someone using your wife's maiden name, and it was for private birth documentation services." The words hit William like physical blows. "Someone falsified my son's birth certificate. It appears that way. The question is why and where the baby in that photograph came from." William stared at the evidence spread across David's desk. His legal mind processed the information methodically, but his heart was breaking with every new revelation. "What do you recommend?" he asked finally.
We need to find out who the man in the photograph is. We need to trace the source of the baby your wife was carrying.
And we probably need to consider DNA testing to determine Marcus's actual parentage. DNA testing? William repeated numbly.
The thought of secretly testing his own son's paternity made him feel like he was betraying 22 years of love and trust. I know it's difficult, David said, but if we're going to get to the truth, we need scientific evidence. William nodded slowly. Do it. Find out everything you can. As he drove back to his office, William's hands were shaking on the steering wheel. The evidence was mounting, and all of it pointed to a conspiracy that had lasted over 2 decades. His wife, the woman he had shared his bed with for 23 years, had apparently orchestrated an elaborate deception involving forged medical documents and a child of unknown origin.
But the worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the realization that he would have to confront not just Camilla, but potentially Marcus as well. And when he did, it would destroy their family completely.
3 days later, David Chen called with news that would shatter what remained of William's world. They met again at David's office, but this time the investigator had brought in a colleague, a woman named Sarah Williams, who specialized in genealogical research and identity verification. William, I want you to meet Sarah, David said. She's helped me piece together what happened 20 seconds ago, and I'm afraid the truth is more complex than we initially suspected. Sarah was a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s who spoke with the precision of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult truths. She had spread a series of documents and photographs across a large conference table, organized with the methodical care of a detective presenting a case. Mr. Henderson, she began gently, before we begin, I want you to understand that what we've discovered involves not just your wife, but a network of individuals who were involved in what appears to have been an organized adoption fraud scheme. William felt his blood run cold. Adoption fraud? Sarah nodded grimly.
We've traced the man in the hotel security photograph. His name was Vincent Romano, and he was involved in arranging private adoptions for wealthy couples who couldn't go through traditional channels.
He died in a car accident in 2003, but we found records of his activities. She pulled out a file thick with documents. Romano operated through a network of corrupt medical professionals, forging birth certificates and creating false medical histories for children whose biological parents were either unwilling or unable to care for them.
Are you telling me that Marcus was part of some kind of illegal adoption ring? William asked, his voice barely above a whisper.
That's exactly what we're telling you, David said.
But there's more.
Sarah, show him what you found about the biological parents. Sarah opened another folder, revealing photographs and documents that made William's hands shake. The first photograph showed a young woman, perhaps 19 or 20, with dark hair and green eyes that were strikingly similar to Marcus's.
This is Elena Rossetti, Sarah explained. She was an Italian exchange student studying in London in 1998.
According to the records we found, she became pregnant by a married man, a prominent businessman, who refused to acknowledge the child or provide any support. William studied the photograph.
The resemblance to Marcus was undeniable. The same eyes, the same facial structure, even the same way of holding her head slightly tilted when she smiled. Elena was desperate, Sarah continued.
She had no family support, no money, and no way to care for a child. Romano approached her through intermediaries and offered her a substantial sum of money in exchange for the baby.
How substantial? William asked. £50,000, which was a fortune to a 19-year-old student with no resources.
David leaned forward.
But here's where your wife comes into the picture. Camilla wasn't just a customer of Romano's service. She was his contact point with other wealthy couples who wanted children but couldn't adopt through legitimate channels. William stared at them both, unable to process what he was hearing. You're saying my wife was involved in selling babies? She was what Romano called a facilitator, Sarah explained.
She would identify couples who were struggling with infertility or who wanted children but couldn't meet adoption requirements. She would connect them with Romano, and in exchange she received both money and priority access to children herself.
The room seemed to spin around William. How many couples? How many children?
We've identified at least 12 different cases over a period of 5 years, David said quietly.
Your wife facilitated the placement of children with families across Europe and North America. She made hundreds of thousands of pounds from these arrangements.
Sarah pulled out another photograph, this one showing Camilla at what appeared to be a social gathering.
She was talking to a well-dressed couple, and in the background, a young woman who looked like she could be pregnant was speaking with an older man.
This photograph was taken at a charity event in 1997, Sarah explained. We believe these events were used as cover for Romano's operation.
Potential adoptive parents would meet with facilitators like your wife and arrangements would be made. William felt sick. But why Marcus? If she was arranging adoptions for other people, why did she take a child for herself? David and Sarah exchanged glances. We believe your wife may have been struggling with fertility issues that she never told you about, David said. According to medical records we found, she had consulted with several fertility specialists in the mid-19s. The timing suggests that she may have been trying to conceive for years without success, Sarah added. When Elena's baby became available, your wife may have seen it as her opportunity to give you the child she thought you wanted. William stood up abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the London street below. Normal people were going about their normal lives, walking to work, shopping, meeting friends for lunch. None of them knew that their world could be shattered by a single conversation, that the people they loved most could be living lies that went back decades. What happened to Elena? He asked without turning around. Sarah's voice was gentle. She died in 2002. Drug overdose in a Milan hospital. According to the people we spoke with who knew her, she never got over giving up her child. The money Romano paid her didn't last long, and she spent years trying to find out what happened to her son. William closed his eyes, feeling the full weight of his wife's deception. Not only had she lied to him for 22 years, but she had been part of a system that had destroyed young women like Elena Rossetti.
There's something else, David said quietly.
We managed to obtain DNA samples from Elena's surviving relatives in Italy. If you're willing to have Marcus tested, we can confirm the biological relationship definitively.
William turned back to face them. How? Hair samples, saliva, anything that contains DNA. It doesn't have to be invasive or obvious. The thought of secretly collecting DNA samples from his son made William feel like he was betraying him all over again. But he had to know the truth, not just for himself, but for Marcus's sake as well. Do it, he said. But be discreet. Over the next week, William found himself living a double life. During the day, he went through the motions of his legal practice, meeting with clients and handling cases with his usual professionalism. But every evening, he returned home to a house that felt like a stage set, where his wife and son performed their roles in a family drama that had been built on lies. Camilla seemed to sense that something was wrong. She asked repeatedly if he was feeling well, if something was troubling him at work, if there was anything she could do to help. Her apparent concern only made William more angry. How dare she pretend to care about his well-being when she had been deceiving him for over 2 decades? Marcus, oblivious to the investigations surrounding his origins, was focused on his university applications and his future plans. He talked enthusiastically about studying law, following in his father's footsteps, maybe even joining the family firm someday. Every word felt like a knife in William's heart. Would Marcus still want to follow in his footsteps once he learned the truth? Would he still consider William his father? Or would he see him as just another victim of his mother's deception? David managed to collect DNA samples without arousing suspicion. A few strands of hair from Marcus's brush, saliva from a drinking glass he had left in the kitchen. The samples were sent to a laboratory in Switzerland where they would be compared with genetic material from Elena's relatives. While they waited for the results, Sarah continued her investigation into Romano's network. She discovered financial records showing payments from Camilla's private accounts to various individuals involved in the adoption scheme. Bank transfers, cash withdrawals, even investments in offshore companies that had been used to launder money from the illegal adoptions. Your wife was very careful about covering her tracks, Sarah explained during another meeting. She used multiple bank accounts, shell companies, even foreign currency exchanges to hide the money trail. This wasn't just a one-time transaction. It was a sophisticated criminal enterprise. William stared at the financial documents spread across the table. The amounts were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of pounds flowing through accounts he had never known existed. All this time, while he had been working to support his family through legitimate means, his wife had been running a criminal operation from their own home. How long was she involved with Romano? He asked. Based on the financial records, at least 5 years, from 1996 until Romano's death in 2003. And I never knew any of this was happening? Sarah's expression was sympathetic. These people were professionals, Mr. Grant. Henderson. They specialized in keeping their activities hidden from family members, law enforcement, even each other. Your wife compartmentalized her life very effectively. The DNA results arrived on a Thursday morning. David called William at his office and asked him to come in immediately. When William arrived, both David and Sarah were waiting with identical grave expressions. "The results are definitive," David said without preamble. "Marcus is Elena Rossetti's biological son. There is no genetic relationship between you and the boy you've raised as your son." William felt something break inside his chest. Even though he had been preparing for this news, hearing it confirmed was devastating. Marcus, his Marcus, the boy who had been the center of his world for 22 years, was not his biological child. "But more than that," Sarah continued, "we found evidence that suggests your wife may have been involved in Elena's death as well." William looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Sarah pulled out another file.
After Elena gave birth and turned the baby over to Romano, she apparently had second thoughts. She tried to contact the adoptive family, tried to get her son back.
According to witnesses we interviewed in Italy, she had tracked down information about where her child was living.
She knew about us?
She had photographs, she knew his name. She even had your address. Elena was planning to come to London in 2002 to try to reclaim her son.
David leaned forward. 2 weeks before her planned trip to London, Elena was found dead in her Milan apartment.
The official cause of death was a drug overdose, but the circumstances were suspicious.
Suspicious how? Elena wasn't known to use drugs, Sarah explained.
She was working as a waitress trying to save money for her trip to London. Friends said she was excited about seeing her son again, that she had been clean and sober for months. William felt a chill run down his spine.
Are you suggesting that my wife had something to do with Elena's death? We're suggesting that it's a remarkable coincidence, David said carefully. A young woman who was planning to disrupt your family life suddenly dies under mysterious circumstances just weeks before she was going to make contact. Sarah opened another file. We found records of a significant cash withdrawal from one of your wife's accounts around the same time. £20,000 withdrawn in Italy during a trip your wife took there in early 2002. William remembered that trip. Camilla had said she was visiting art museums in Florence and Rome, a cultural vacation she had planned as a surprise for herself. She had been gone for 10 days and had come back with stories about the beautiful cities and the wonderful people she had met. You think she went to Italy to... It'd come back with stories about the beautiful cities and the wonderful people she had met. You think she went to Italy to silence Elena? We think it's possible, David said. We're still investigating, but the timing is very suspicious. William stood up and walked to the window again, his mind reeling with the implications. Not only had his wife stolen a child and built their family on lies, but she might have committed murder to protect those lies. What do you recommend? He asked finally.
That depends on what you want to accomplish, Sarah said. If you want to involve law enforcement, we have enough evidence to warrant an investigation into both the adoption fraud and Elena's death.
But if you just want to confront your wife privately, we can provide you with all the documentation you need to prove what she's done, David added. William thought about Marcus, about the young man who was innocently planning his future while unaware that his entire identity was built on crime and deception. Did he deserve to learn that his mother might be a murderer? Did he deserve to know that his real mother had died trying to get him back?
I need some time to think, William said.
Of course, David replied. But you should know that we're not the only ones investigating this.
Some of the other families who were affected by Romano's network have hired investigators too. This story is going to come out eventually, whether you're ready for it or not.
William drove home that evening with his mind made up. He couldn't continue living this lie, couldn't pretend that his marriage was normal, couldn't look at Marcus without thinking about Elena Rossetti and the sacrifice she had made. It was time to confront Camilla with the truth. But first, he needed to decide how to protect his son from the worst of what was coming.
Because regardless of Marcus's biological origins, regardless of the circumstances that had brought him into their family, William loved him as deeply as any father had ever loved a child. And somehow, he had to find a way to preserve that relationship while his entire world collapsed around them.
William spent the weekend in his study poring over the evidence David and Sarah had compiled. Bank statements, photographs, witness testimonies, DNA results, everything that proved his wife was not the woman he had thought he married.
He organized it all with the same methodical precision he used for his most important legal cases, because this confrontation would require every skill he had developed over 25 years of practice. By Sunday evening he had made his decision. He would confront Camilla alone, without Marcus present, and give her one chance to tell him the truth voluntarily. If she continued to lie, he would present the evidence and demand answers.
Either way, their marriage was over, but how it ended would determine whether any part of their family could be salvaged. Monday morning arrived, gray and drizzling, matching William's mood perfectly. 6. This Trosco is good.
He told Mrs. Patterson to cancel all his appointments for the day and left the office before 10 o'clock. When he arrived home, Marcus was at university and Camilla was in her usual morning spot, the sunroom where she liked to read and tend to her orchids. She looked up when he entered, and her face immediately showed concern. "William, what are you doing home so early? Are you feeling ill?" For 23 years, that expression of caring had been one of his greatest comforts. Now it seemed like another performance, another lie in a lifetime of deception. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm but cold. "It's important." Camilla set down her book. A biography of some Italian Renaissance artist, he noted with bitter irony, and gave him her full attention. "Of course, what's troubling you?" William sat down across from her, the morning light streaming through the windows, making everything seem surreal. This room had been the scene of so many family conversations over the years. Christmas morning gift exchanges, discussions about Marcus's education, quiet Sunday mornings when they planned their weeks together. "I want you to tell me about November 15th, 1998, he said simply. The change in Camilla's expression was instantaneous. The color drained from her face, and her hands trembled slightly as she set down her teacup. For a moment she looked like she might faint. What do you mean?" she asked, but her voice was already different, higher, more strained. "The night Marcus was born," William continued. "I want you to tell me exactly what happened that night." Camilla was quiet for a long moment, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Marcus was born at the hospital, St. Mary's, you know that." William reached into his briefcase and pulled out the first piece of evidence. The hotel security photograph showing Camilla in the Claridge lobby at 11:30 p.m., holding what appeared to be an infant. According to his birth certificate, Marcus was born at 11:47 p.m. at St. Mary's Hospital, William said, his lawyer's training keeping his voice steady. "But this photograph shows you at the Claridge Hotel at 11:30 p.m. How do you explain that?" Camilla stared at the photograph for a long time, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. When she looked up, her eyes were filled with tears, but also something else, relief perhaps that the secret she had carried for so long was finally coming to light. "How did you get this?" she asked. "That's not important right now. What's important is that you tell me the truth, all of it." Camilla stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens she had tended for over 2 decades. When she spoke, her voice was distant, as if she was recounting someone else's story. "Couldn't have children," she said. "We tried for years, and I saw specialist after specialist, but nothing worked. The doctors said it was unlikely I would ever conceive naturally." William felt a pang of sympathy despite his anger. They had tried to have children for several years after their marriage, and when nothing happened, they had simply stopped discussing it. He had assumed Camilla wasn't ready, that she wanted to focus on other things first. "You never told me about the specialists," he said. "I was ashamed," Camilla replied, still looking out the window. "I thought if you knew the truth, you might leave me. So you decided to lie instead?" Camilla turned to face him, and William could see the woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago. Vulnerable, desperate, terrified of losing what mattered most to her. "I met Vincent Romano at a charity function in 1996, she said. "He told me about couples who were having trouble with traditional adoption processes and about young women who needed help with unwanted pregnancies. It seemed like a solution that could help everyone." "You became involved in selling babies," William said bluntly. Camilla flinched as if he had slapped her. "I helped connect people who needed each other, couples who desperately wanted children with young women who couldn't care for their babies. Everyone benefited." William pulled out the financial records Sarah had compiled. "You made hundreds of thousands of pounds from these connections, Camilla. This wasn't charity. It was a criminal enterprise." Camilla sat down heavily, all pretense of composure gone. "Yes, there was money involved. But that wasn't why I did it initially. I did it because I wanted to help people." "And Marcus?" Fresh tears rolled down Camilla's face. Elena was 19 years old. She had no family, no support, no way to care for a baby. The father was a married businessman who refused to acknowledge the child. She was going to put the baby up for adoption anyway, so you arranged to take him yourself. Vincent suggested it. Elena's baby was due right around the time we had told everyone I was expecting. It seemed like fate.
William felt sick listening to her rationalize what she had done. You forged medical records.
You falsified our son's birth certificate. You made me believe he was my biological child. I wanted him to be yours, Camilla said desperately. I wanted us to be a real family. Marcus needed parents who would love him, and you needed a son. It seemed perfect. William pulled out the photograph of Elena Rossetti. This young woman died trying to get her child back. Did you know that? Camilla's face went white. Elena overdosed. It was tragic, but it had nothing to do with us.
She died 2 weeks before she was planning to come to London to reclaim Marcus, William said, watching Camilla's face carefully. 2 weeks before she would have destroyed our family by revealing the truth. That's a coincidence, Camilla said, but her voice lacked conviction. William placed the bank records in front of her. You withdrew £20,000 during a trip to Italy in early 2002. 1702.
The same trip where Elena Rossetti died of a convenient overdose. Camilla stared at the bank statements, her hands shaking visibly now. You don't understand.
Elena was unstable. She was making threats, saying she would go to the police, that she would destroy everyone involved in the adoption network.
She could have ruined dozens of families. So you killed her? The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Camilla looked up at William with eyes that were now completely different from the woman he had married. There was something hard and calculating there, something that had perhaps always been hidden beneath the surface. I didn't kill anyone, she said carefully, but I may have. Helped Elena make a decision about her future. William felt his blood run cold.
What does that mean? It means I gave her enough money to disappear forever. Enough to start a new life somewhere far away from London. Far away from Marcus.
If she chose to use that money to buy drugs instead, that was her decision.
You gave her money for drugs knowing she was an addict?
I gave her money to solve a problem, Camilla said, her voice hardening. A problem that threatened our family, our happiness, our son's future. Elena was going to destroy everything we had built together. William stood up, pacing to the window and back. 23 years of marriage, and he had never known the woman sitting across from him. The Camilla he thought he had married was gentle, caring, incapable of hurting anyone. This woman was a stranger, a criminal who had orchestrated the deaths of vulnerable people to protect her lies. What about Marcus? He asked. What happens to him when this comes out? It doesn't have to come out, Camilla said quickly. Elena is dead. Vincent is dead. Most of the people involved in the network are gone. We can protect Marcus from all of this. William pulled out the DNA test results and placed them on the table between them. These are the results comparing Marcus's DNA with Elena's family. He's her son, Camilla, not mine.
When this investigation becomes public, and it will become public, Marcus will learn the truth about his origins.
Camilla picked up the DNA results and stared at them, her last hope of maintaining the deception finally crumbling.
He's still your son in every way that matters, she said desperately. You raised him, you loved him. You taught him everything he knows. Biology doesn't change that, but lies do, William replied. 22 years of lies change everything. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of revelations settling between them like a chasm that could never be bridged. Finally, Camilla spoke again. What are you going to do? William had been dreading this question, but he had also been preparing for it. I'm going to tell Marcus the truth. He deserves to know about his biological mother, about how he came to be part of our family. He deserves to make his own decisions about his future with full knowledge of his past.
And then I'm filing for divorce. I'm also turning over all the evidence we've gathered to the authorities.
There may be other families affected by Romano's network who deserve answers. Camilla's face crumpled. William, please, think about what this will do to Marcus. He's just a boy. He doesn't need to know about Elena, about the adoption network, about any of this. We can protect him. By continuing to lie to him? By pretending that his entire identity isn't built on deception and possibly murder?
No, Camilla. Marcus is 22 years old.
He's not a child anymore, and he deserves the truth. William began gathering up the evidence, preparing to leave. There was nothing more to be said between them. Their marriage was over. Their family was destroyed. And the only question remaining was how to minimize the damage to the one person who didn't deserve any of this.
Marcus, where will you go? Camilla asked quietly. I'm staying at the Savoy tonight. Tomorrow I'll find a flat somewhere in the city. And Marcus? William paused at the door. That's up to him. When I tell him the truth, he can decide for himself where he wants to live, whether he wants to maintain a relationship with either of us. As William drove away from the house that had been his home for over 20 years, he felt empty rather than angry.
The rage that had sustained him through the investigation was gone, replaced by a profound sadness for all the lives that had been damaged by his wife's deceptions. Elena Rossetti would never see her son become a man.
Marcus would have to rebuild his entire sense of identity. And William would have to learn how to love a son who might blame him for the destruction of the only family he had ever known.
But as painful as the truth was, it was still better than continuing to live a lie. Tomorrow, he would have the most difficult conversation of his life.
Tonight, he would mourn for the family that had never really existed at all. William spent a sleepless night at the Savoy, staring at the Thames and rehearsing how he would tell Marcus that everything he believed about his life was a lie.
How do you explain to a young man that his mother might be a murderer? How do you tell him that his real mother died, trying to get him back? By morning, William had decided on a direct approach.
Marcus deserved the complete truth, presented clearly and with all the evidence to support it. After that, it would be up to his son to decide how to process the information and what kind of relationship, if any, he wanted to maintain with his adoptive parents.
William called Marcus's mobile phone at 9 o'clock. Dad, is everything okay? Mom said you didn't come home last night. The concern in his son's voice almost broke William's resolve. This young man loved him, trusted him, looked up to him as a role model and mentor. In a few hours, all of that might be destroyed. Marcus, I need to see you today. There's something very important we need to discuss. Can you meet me in my office this morning?
Of course.
Is it about university? Did something happen with my applications? No, son. It's about our family, about your mother and me, and about some things that happened before you were born. There was silence on the other end of the line. Marcus was intelligent enough to hear the gravity in his father's voice, mature enough to understand that this wasn't a casual conversation. I'll be there in an hour, Marcus said quietly. William used the time to organize his thoughts and prepare the evidence.
He arranged everything chronologically, from the security guard's initial revelation through the DNA test results. He practiced his explanation, trying to find words that would be honest but not unnecessarily cruel. When Marcus arrived at the office, William could see immediately that the young man was nervous. He was dressed carefully in his best suit, as if he was attending a formal interview. His dark hair was neatly combed and his green eyes, Elena's eyes, William now knew, were alert but apprehensive. "Dad, you're scaring me," Marcus said as he sat down across from William's desk.
"What's going on?" William looked at his son, the boy he had raised, taught, loved, and been proud of for 22 years, and felt his heart break all over again. "Marcus, what I'm about to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear. It's going to change how you understand your life, your family, and your identity. But you deserve to know the truth, and you're old enough now to handle it."
Marcus leaned forward, his expression growing more serious. "Tell me."
William began with James Morrison's phone call and worked through the investigation methodically.
He showed Marcus the hotel security photographs, the forged medical records, the financial evidence of Camilla's involvement in the adoption fraud network. With each piece of evidence, he watched his son's face grow paler and more shocked. When William reached the DNA test results, Marcus was completely silent, staring at the documents with the same stunned expression William had worn when he first saw them. "So, I'm not your biological son," Marcus said finally, his voice hollow. "No, you're not. Your biological mother was a young Italian woman named Elena Rossetti. In fact, assistant informed the pandemic. She was 19 when you were born, and she gave you to the adoption network because she had no way to care for you." William pulled out Elena's photograph and placed it on the desk between them. Marcus stared at it for a long time, touching his own face unconsciously as he noted the resemblance. "She looks like me," he said quietly. "Very much so. You have her eyes, her facial structure, even some of her mannerisms. What happened to her?" This was the part William had been dreading most. "She tried to find you in 2002.
She had tracked down information about where you were living and was planning to come to London to make contact.
2 weeks before her planned trip, she died of a drug overdose in Italy. Marcus looked up sharply. An overdose? Was she an addict? According to the people we spoke with, she wasn't known to use drugs. She was working, saving money for her trip to London. The circumstances of her death were
suspicious. William explained about Camilla's trip to Italy, the cash withdrawal, the timing of Elena's death. As he talked, you watched Marcus's expression change from shock to horror to something that looked like rage. Are you telling me that Mum killed my real mother? Marcus asked, his voice tight with emotion.
I'm telling you that the evidence suggests your mother may have been involved in Elena's death. I can't prove it definitively, but the timing and circumstances are very suspicious.
Marcus stood up and walked to the window just as William had done in David Chen's office. He stood there for several minutes, staring out at the London streets, processing the magnitude of what he had just learned.
All these years, Marcus said without turning around, I thought I knew who I was. I thought I understood my family, my history, my place in the world.
You are exactly the person you've always been, William said gently. None of this changes your character, your accomplishments, your value as a human being, but it changes everything else, doesn't it? Marcus turned to face him.
My name, my birth certificate, my entire legal identity, it's all based on lies. William nodded.
Yes, it is. And Mum,
the woman who raised me, who I've loved and trusted my entire life, she might be a murderer. I don't know for certain. But she was definitely involved in criminal activities that hurt vulnerable young women like your biological mother.
Marcus sat down again, his head in his hands. I don't know how to process this. I don't know what to feel, or think, or do.
Take your time, William said. This is overwhelming information. You don't have to make any decisions right now.
What are you going to do? Marcus asked. About Mum. About the evidence. About everything. I'm divorcing your mother.
I'm also turning the evidence over to the authorities so they can investigate the full extent of the adoption fraud network. Other families were affected by this, and they deserve answers too.
And what about me? What about us? This was the question William had been hoping for and dreading in equal measure.
That's up to you, Marcus. As far as I'm concerned, you're my son in every way that matters.
I raised you, I love you, and I'm proud of the man you become. If you want to maintain our relationship, I would be honored to continue being your father.
Marcus looked at him with tears in his eyes. You still want me as your son? Even knowing that we're not related, that I'm the product of criminal activity?
Marcus, listen to me very carefully, William said, his voice strong and certain.
You are not the product of criminal activity. You are the son of a young woman who loved you enough to make an incredible sacrifice to ensure you had a better life. You are also the son of a man who has loved you every single day for 22 years, regardless of biology. But if Mum hadn't, if this hadn't happened, you would never have known me. That's true.
But it did happen, and I do know you, and I can't imagine my life without you in it. They sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the emotional weight of the conversation.
Finally, Marcus spoke again. I want to know more about Elena, about my biological mother. I want to understand who she was, what her life was like, what she went through to bring me into the world.
David Chen can help with that. He's still in contact with Elena's relatives in Italy.
They would probably be very happy to meet you. And I want to be involved in the investigation. If Mum did what you think she did, if she hurt Elena and other young women, then she needs to face consequences for that. William felt a surge of pride at his son's moral clarity. Even in the midst of personal devastation, Marcus was thinking about justice for others. That won't be easy, William warned.
The media attention, the legal proceedings, the scrutiny of our family, it's going to be very difficult. I know, but it's the right thing to do. Over the next few weeks, their world exploded in exactly the way William had predicted. The story broke in the London papers first. Prominent lawyer's wife involved in baby trafficking ring. And quickly spread to national and international media. Reporters camped outside their house, outside William's office, outside Marcus's university. Camilla was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit adoption fraud, falsifying medical documents, and accessory to murder in connection with Elena's death. The evidence was strong enough to warrant prosecution, though the outcome was far from certain. Marcus handled the attention with remarkable grace, giving carefully prepared statements about his desire to honor his biological mother's memory
and his support for other victims of the adoption fraud network.
He also publicly acknowledged William as his father in every meaningful sense of the word. The investigation expanded to include other families who had been affected by Romano's network.
David Chen and Sarah Williams found themselves coordinating with law enforcement agencies across Europe as the scope of the criminal enterprise became clear. William moved into a flat in central London and began the painful process of rebuilding his life.
The divorce proceedings were complicated by the criminal charges against Camilla, but William was determined to move forward regardless of how long it took.
6 months after that first conversation with James Morrison, William and Marcus met for lunch at a quiet restaurant near William's new flat. The media attention had died down somewhat, and they were able to have a private conversation for the first time in weeks.
"How are you doing with all of this?" William asked. "Really, I mean. Not the public version you give to reporters."
Marcus considered the question carefully. "It's strange. I keep expecting to wake up one morning and discover that this was all a dream, that I'm still the person I thought I was 6 months ago. Do you regret learning the truth?" "No," Marcus said without hesitation. "It's painful, and it's complicated, and it's changed everything about how I understand my life. But I needed to know." Elena deserved to have her story told. William smiled. "You sound like a lawyer." "I've been thinking about that, actually. About law school. About following in your footsteps. Do you think I still should? Do you want to?" "I think so. But maybe a different kind of law than what you do. Maybe something that helps people like Elena, people who get caught up in systems they can't control." William felt that familiar surge of parental pride. "That sounds like exactly the kind of lawyer the world needs." They talked about Marcus's plans for university, about the extended family he had discovered in Italy, about the ongoing legal proceedings against Camilla. It was a different kind of relationship than they had shared before, more adult, more complex, but in some ways deeper than it had ever been. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Marcus asked the question that had been hanging between them for months. "You think you can forgive her?" "Mom, I mean. For what she did to Elena, to us, to everyone." William thought about it seriously. "I don't know. Part of me understands why she did it. She was desperate for a child, desperate to give me what she thought I wanted. But the way she went about it, the people she hurt, the lives she destroyed, I don't know if I can forgive that." "I keep thinking about Elena," Marcus said, "about how she must have felt. Giving up her baby, trying to find me dying alone in that hospital. She was just a teenager, Dad. She was younger than I am now. I know. Sometimes I feel guilty for being happy, for having had a good life, a loving family, all the opportunities she wanted me to have. How do I reconcile that with the knowledge that it all came at such a terrible cost?" William reached across the table and put his hand on his son's arm. "You honor her memory by living the kind of life she wanted you to have. You use the opportunities you were given to make the world better for other people in her situation. You don't let her sacrifice be meaningless." Marcus nodded, tears in his eyes. "I want to visit her grave. In Italy. I want to tell her that I turned out okay, that I'm grateful for what she did." "We'll go together," William said. "When the trial is over, when things settle down, we'll go to Italy and pay our respects to Elena Rossetti." As they walked out of the restaurant together, William reflected on how much his definition of family had changed over the past year. Biology was important, but it wasn't everything. Love, commitment, shared values, mutual respect, these were the things that really made people family. Marcus would always be his son, regardless of DNA. The young man walking beside him had been shaped by 22 years of love, guidance, and shared experiences. A criminal conspiracy had brought them together, but their relationship had grown into something real and meaningful that no revelation could destroy. The truth had been devastating, but it had also been liberating. They no longer had to live with lies or half-truths or carefully guarded secrets. Their relationship now was built on honesty and choice, rather than deception and legal documents. William's rage had burned itself out, replaced by a determination to build something better from the ashes of his old life. He had lost a wife and a marriage, but he had gained something more valuable. A relationship with his son that was based on truth rather than lies. And somewhere in Italy, in a small cemetery outside Milan, Elena Rossetti could finally rest in peace, knowing that her son had grown up to be exactly the kind of man she had hoped he would become. A father's rage. William faces Camilla's son. After guard reveals shocking truth.